Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is joining us today for the second webinar organized by IFC and Women on gender data gaps. Today, we will be talking about measurement as a tool for prevention of gender-based violence in the private sector. We are just giving everybody a few more minutes to join. So thank you all for joining on the dot, and also thank you for your patience, just to give everybody a few more minutes to join. Just some housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared afterwards and made accessible to everybody online. You can use the chat function to introduce yourself, where you're from, what company you're working with, etc., so that we know who's in the room. And you can ask questions through the Q&A function. So if you have a look at the top band of your Teams webinar, there is this Q&A function, so you can click on it, post your questions there, and we will be answering them either in writing or live. The goal really is today that we can hear different voices and exchange on the questions and answer the questions that you have. So please do put your questions in the Q&A to the panelists and the speakers. The session will be held in English, but for those who would like to have an AI caption translation in a different language, please do feel free to go again to the band on the top of your Teams. You can click on the 3 dots for more, look for the drop down saying language and speech, activate it, and then choose your language settings according to what you feel most comfortable with. Great. I already see we have some introductions happening in the chat. Wonderful to see you all. In the interest of time, I think I will hand over to Anna for our welcome remarks.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are joining from. It's our real pleasure to welcome you to the second session in our joint webinar series with IFC. And I'm very pleased that we're partnering on this topic. Addressing gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace is not only urgent, it is also an area where collaboration really helps move the needle. So let me start with a few facts. Globally, nearly 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and many of these experiences extend into the world of work. Surveys also suggest that up to 1 in 2 women have experienced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace during their careers. Studies also show that most incidents go unreported, often due to fear of retaliation, stigma, or lack of trust in the reporting mechanisms. And that creates a real challenge, because if something is not reported, it is often not measured. And if it's not measured, it's very difficult to address it in a systematic way. Not addressing these issues carries significant cost, not only for the survivors, but also for employers. It affects employee safety and well-being, productivity, retention, and ultimately organizational performance. It also carries legal, reputational, and operational risks to companies. So while many companies recognize that gender-based violence and harassment is a serious issue, the question becomes, how do we actually understand the scale of the problem, and how do we act on it? And what we are seeing more and more is that companies are being asked not just to have policies in place, but to demonstrate that those policies are actually working. And that's where the measurement comes in. Measurement is not just about reporting, it's about visibility. It helps uncover patterns, identify risk areas, and understand root causes. It gives companies a much clearer basis for action, and prevention. And importantly, it also strengthens accountability. Because once you have the data, you can track progress and you can adjust your approach and you can demonstrate change over time. At the same time, we know that it's not that straightforward, as we will learn also today. Measuring GBVH requires trust. It requires safe and confidential mechanisms, and it requires a thoughtful approach on how data is collected and used. And that's exactly why today's session matters. We'll be drawing on UN Women's normalized no more guidance and IFC's respectful workplaces research, bringing together evidence and practical tools to help you move from awareness to measurement and ultimately prevention. We would also hear directly from two companies, also web signatories, who are putting these approaches into practice, sharing what works and what challenges remain. So my hope for today is really simple, that you leave with a clearer understanding on what to measure, how to measure it, and how to use the data to drive real change within your organizations. Because safer and more respectful workplaces do not happen by accident. They are built through intentional action, informed by data, and sustained by leadership. So thanks again for joining, everyone, and I would really look forward to the discussion today. And I'll hand it back over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I will just briefly walk you through the agenda. As mentioned, we have a lot of very interesting speakers with us today. We will be starting with a presentation on advancing the measurement of sexual harassment by Rafaela Rafin from UN Women. And then we will be going right into the panel conversation, which focuses on from data to action, how companies are measuring gender-based violence and sexual harassment, but also using this to prevent and to create effective response mechanisms. So we have Jemima Gorn from the Vodafone Foundation, as well as Dan Nielsen from Vodafone, who will be giving us the company perspective from Vodafone, as well as Anastasia Surabishvili, apologies Anastasia, from Georgia, the Ajara Group. The session will be moderated by Namita Datta and include Lilian Onsongo as well, who will be presenting research from the IFC group. So an exciting agenda, and without further ado, I would invite Rafaela to unmute and to tell us a bit more about the Normalized No More report. Rafaela, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining from different places, and thank you for coming in today. So while the focus of today's session is broadly, as Anna introduced, on addressing gender-based violence and harassment, gender-based violence covers, as you know, many forms of harm and abuse across different settings, with severe consequences, not only for women and girls, but for societies altogether. And so for this session specifically, I will focus on one of its most insidious everyday occurrence, which is directly relevant for industry partners, that is sexual harassment, as one of the forms that might be the most prevalent in and around the world of work. So in the past 2 decades, in general, we've seen major advances in measuring violence against women. And I mentioned we now have global estimates that says that 1 in 3 women experiences physical and or sexual violence by their partner or non-partners in their lifetime. But that's only about these forms, right? And which is already a big progress to be able to measure these in comparable ways across countries. But today, sexual harassment remains inconsistently defined and measured, limiting data quality, comparability, and effective policy use eventually. So to fill this gap, UN Women, we developed in collaboration with the Newcomb Institute of Tulane University, a practical guidance, which is called the Evidence-Based Guide to Measuring Sexual Harassment, or Normalized No More. which synthesizes lessons from tested and validated measures. This is part of UN Women's work in developing and informing global norms and standards, including methodologies. So this guidance that I will briefly present today, you'll see is not specific for private sector companies. Gaps in frameworks and policies are today still very much present at government level as much. We've seen progress in recent years, and some of the speakers who will come after me will share that as well in their respective efforts. But while many companies we know have policies in place, gaps in how sexual harassment is defined and measured mean that a significant share of harm remains invisible for a variety of reasons, again, that Anna touched upon, including trust or uniformity in measures. So the idea is also to work together in sharing those measures so that together we can produce some comparable data and get a better picture of how sexual harassment actually manifests. So next slide, please. We will start, thank you, by the definition and why a definition of sexual harassment that is inclusive is important to be adopted. We've reviewed all definitions, almost operational definitions that exist, and we see that they were mostly developed with a narrow focus. Many of them focus exclusively on the workplace, which itself is narrowly defined as really being in the place of work, but not necessarily, for example, in the transportations between home or work, or also not necessarily covering different work settings, such as, for instance, domestic workers working in private homes. We also see that an important aspect which was missing so far is the technology-facilitated sexual harassment, which is a growing concern, and that is disproportionately affecting young people, women in public life, and groups of women who already face higher risks of discrimination and abuse. And it is very important to capture these intersectional risks. And these include women of color, indigenous women, and women with diverse sexual orientation, gender identities and gender expressions, and sex characteristics. So we produced, and I believe Alex is kindly sharing the link in the chat, a revised, more inclusive definition through global consultations. And we define sexual harassment as any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, whether physical or non-physical, in person or online, that can reasonably be expected or is perceived to cause harm. So the perception is very important in that definition, and it's really important to take into account how the constituency that you will survey perceives what is unacceptable behavior. And this harm, important as well, to define the consequences of it. So it can include humiliation, intimidation, psychological or emotional distress, or disruption to economic security and daily functioning. So crucially, elements of this definition is that sexual harassment can occur across settings. So not only in offices, factories, or boardrooms, but also during work-related travel, commuting, in public spaces, and online platforms used for work, for instance. Also, sexual harassment takes many forms. It can be verbal, visual, physical, increasingly, as I mentioned, technology facilitated, such as abusive messages, image-based harassment, or online stalking. It is also shaped by power relations that can happen between managers and staff, clients and service workers, colleagues, and even peers or partners. Social and structural power imbalances are linked to gender, race, age, disability, sexual orientation, or employment status, and they strongly influence the risk and impact of sexual harassment. So it's really important, again, to adopt an inclusive definition, because when definitions are too narrow, we know that harm is systematically undercounted. And if you adopt an inclusive definition, it will allow your organization to see the full picture of risk across your workforce and value chains. Next slide, please. So what and how to measure sexual harassment concretely? Measurement, we know, is not just about asking whether harassment happened. It is about how, where, how often, and under what condition it occurs. So our guidance covers and highlights several core measurement elements. First, important to measure prevalence and frequency. Companies need to know not only whether sexual harassment occurs, but how widespread it is and whether it is repeated. And that for single yes or no questions in surveys tend to underestimate experiences. Second, important to cover forms and settings. Measurement should capture different behaviors. I said verbal, physical, and online across workplaces, public spaces linked to work, and digital environment. Third, look at context and power relations. It is important to understand the relationship between the person harmed and the perpetrator to identify structural risks and accountability gaps. Fourth, look at impacts in your measurement. We saw that very few existing measures ask about consequences, yet harassment often affects mental health, job satisfaction, productivity, absenteeism, staff turnover, and career progression. And finally, we recommend looking at norms and perceived safety. Indeed, measuring attitudes, so these are what behaviors are seen as acceptable, tolerated, or minimized, and that can, of course, change from one context or one country to another. It helps companies understand workplace culture, not just incidents that happen. And importantly, a recommendation is that effective measurement uses behaviors-based questions rather than labels. So that means asking clear acts that happen to people and not using have you ever faced sexual harassment, for instance, because each of us will have different definition and understanding of what sexual harassment is, but ask specific acts. Next slide, please. So you will see the guidance came with 3 sets of questions to measure sexual harassment in different settings. This is the one about workplace, and you see how the different elements that I mentioned can be captured in a very limited set of questions. Here are only 3 questions, but some ask about the different time frame, whether it's ever or in the past 12 months. You have also some repetition elements and some perception related questions. So this is really a minimum recommended set of questions, but depending on the tools that you are using, of course, much more elements can be captured, notably the consequences as I just mentioned. Next slide, please. So just to finish on the actual point of capturing this data and measuring sexual harassment, as we all agree, is to using this data for enhanced safety and to enable prevention, accountability, and safer workplaces. For prevention, we know that data allows companies to identify high-risk settings, roles, or moments, such as certain job categories, shifts, or digital platforms, and to design and response targeted interventions to prevent violence from happening or sexual harassment in the first place. For accountability, disaggregated and contextualized data helps organizations move beyond individual complaints to identify systemic issues, gaps in reporting mechanisms, or failures in management response. And finally, data can also be used for workplace culture to signal that the company takes the issue seriously. It helps track progress over time as well and builds trust when employees see that data leads to concrete changes. I'd like to just conclude by illustrating these that can sound pretty theoretical with a concrete example from a partnership between UN Women and the agricultural value chains in India. Specifically was the tea sector in Assam and the spice sector in Rajasthan and Kerala, where data was the starting point of action. It started this partnership with collecting evidence through scoping studies, which were conducted across estates and farming communities, gathering data directly from women workers, frontline health staff, and management. The findings of these studies highlighted concrete operational risks, widespread stress and anxiety after COVID-19, which was conducted a short time after the pandemic, high rates of anemia affecting productivity, limited access to health services, and persistent risks of sexual harassment in work and community spaces. So next step was to share this data with industry partners and directly shape responses together. Mental health impacts that were identified through the research led to targeted awareness and on-site support. Nutrition data informed practical, low-cost dietary interventions using local food, and evidence of service gaps resulted in mobile health and legal clinics being brought directly into workplaces, including support and compliance with India's sexual harassment legislation. Crucially, the data enabled structured engagement with estate management and sector actors, strengthening internal complaints mechanisms, improving workplace well-being, and reducing reputational and compliance risks. So this was conducted within a global program that's celebrating its 15th anniversary this year, which is called Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces. And I can share more resources in the chat as well, as we recently published a compendium of good practices where we also keep track of how to partner, notably with industry, on ending sexual harassment and other forms of sexual violence. And you will see, interestingly, that it also has different tracks to address this, in whether it's in urban or rural spaces, as one of the myths is that sexual harassment is a very urban phenomenon, which is not. So for us, the takeaway for business is clear. When companies use localized worker-generated data, they can move from reactive approaches to proactive action, and therefore strengthen safety, resilience, and sustainability across their supply chains. And on that, back to you, Alex, and thanks again for the invitation today.
Thank you so much, Rafaela, for introducing us to the topic, making sure we have a common understanding of what we are talking about when we're talking about harassment in the workplace, and also what are some good practices in measuring. So I have the great pleasure to hand over to Namita Datta, who is a principal economist at the World Bank Group on policy, regulation, and gender. And she will be guiding us through the following section, which is really where we're able to hear from companies about what they are doing, how they're measuring, and what impact this has. Namita, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anna and Rafael, for laying the groundwork, the framework. Anna, I really like the poster that's right behind in your office, which says equality means business, isn't it? I mean, I really like. I want that poster. And Rafael, I really liked the inclusive definition that you've come up with. I think this is such a nuanced, such a difficult topic to address. And I both of you mentioned a statistic, and I think we're all familiar with that statistic, but I just want us to pause for like literally a second and just think about it. 1 in 3 women, which means maybe every 3rd woman you're going to meet today has experienced some form of violence. And I was struck by another statistic that came from one of the UN women publications that every 11 minutes, a woman dies. She's killed by either a family member or an intimate partner. Just think about it. Even during the course of our webinar today, like 60 minutes, like 5 women would have lost their lives. This is pervasive. It is deep. It's hard to address. Because it's so sort of meshed up with social norms and the way we are brought up, but it affects every aspect of women's lives. And behind the data is really a huge barrier to achieving their fullest human potential. So more from me, because I think Anna laid it out perfectly. I'm going to go straight to the conversation because we have 4 really wonderful panelists, and I'm not going to introduce them. You see their titles and the organizations they come from. I'm going to start with you, Jemima. So Jemima Gon is a global program manager at the Vodafone Foundation. So that's the foundation side of the business. So Jemima, you heard also from Rafael the inclusion of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. We're becoming increasingly aware of this, right? Technology has become just another instrument to take the offline violence to online violence, right? But technology can also be an instrument to address gender-based violence. And your company, your foundation, sorry, has done something quite interesting in the Bright Sky app. So tell us about it. Could you tell us how you're using technology as an instrument to address GBV? Over to you.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much. And hello to everyone. It's very, very nice to be with you here today. Thanks for having us. So yes, as you said, Namita, I work at Vodafone Foundation, which is the charitable arm of Vodafone. So we use technology to support the countries that Vodafone operates in. We're a large company. I think we're in about 25 countries. So we have a global reach. So I'll just tell you a bit about why we're sort of in this space, and then I'll go into Bright Sky. So Vodafone Foundation has supported survivors of domestic abuse for about 20 years now. For the reason we have all been discussing, it affects 1 in 3 women. It's clearly a global issue, and we feel that with our global reach, we can try and help as many people as possible. So we started by supporting the most high risk survivors. And as our kind of understanding of survivor needs grew, we recognized the importance of providing accessible support to as many people as we possibly can. So that led to the creation of Bright Sky. So Bright Sky is an app and website which is free and discreet, and it is designed to support anyone who is worried about domestic abuse, either for themselves or for somebody else. And it has lots of features, but as a kind of top line, so Bright Sky will help the user recognize the signs of abuse. It will help the person using it understand different forms of abuse and also how they can respond safely to that. And importantly, it will help them find trusted and local routes to specialist support. So in terms of the kind of scale and reach, Bright Sky has been downloaded 1.6 million times. It's across 13 countries, and I've seen in the chat that it's a very global chat. So I'm pleased that Bright Sky is available in lots of those countries. And it's Bright Sky is designed to be relevant across different cultural and legal contexts. So we work with localized domestic abuse charities in every market that we're in. So just a quick word on the data, which obviously is what this important discussion is about. So just a quick caveat to say, Bright Sky does not collect any personal data whatsoever. It's a purely anonymous app, and the primary purpose of it is to provide information and guidance and safe signposting. What we can see, though, as the Bright Sky team, is anonymized data on how Bright Sky is being used, the different features, if there's trends, and obviously we can look into what different countries are looking like. So in terms of the most used features, the most kind of popular feature would be the guides. So the guides are kind of information and advice. The most popular guide in every single country is forms of abuse. So, what that's telling us is that people are downloading Bright Sky or going to the Bright Sky website to try and understand a bit about what they might be experiencing. We know that often people don't even realize that they might be in an abusive relationship. The second kind of most popular feature is online safety. And I know that was mentioned earlier, definitely becoming a more kind of prominent issue in in today's world with AI and cyber stalking and things like that. So we're always adding content onto that specific feature, and we see it's actually being used more in recent times. And finally, a service directory is consistently used. So this is you can put in your address or wherever you live, and it will give you a list of all of the domestic abuse specialist support services that are nearby. So people are, coming to use it to try and find a safe pathway. And so, we are constantly analysing the feature usage and usage spikes and updating the content on Bright Sky to ensure that it's relevant and, culturally relevant as well. It's very important. And so I guess the final thing I'll just say is, sorry if you can hear my door going, is that we at the foundation, we're also we invest heavily in advocacy. So we run lots of campaigns every year to raise awareness. We've been doing this for 7 years during the 16 days of activism, which I'm sure everyone is aware of on this call. And we've reached a fantastic milestone this year. Because we've reached 100 million women through those campaigns. So, we really do try and get the word out as far and wide as possible. So I'll stop there. So thank you so much for listening to me. And obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end that come up.
I would love to dig deeper on the data that you've gathered, Jemima. I mean, you must be seeing some trends in different countries, how women in different countries are responding. And I'm curious if your data tells you whether the person who downloaded the guide that you were mentioning then took some action, or did like what happened after. But maybe this is something we can dig deeper in if we have some time during the Q&A. But I want to go to you, Anastasia. Anastasia, you are corporate communications lead for Ajara Group, which is a leading Georgian company. You've got I think there are multiple locations within Georgia that your offices are present, right? And you have about 1,500 employees. So as a company, what kind of data are you gathering, and how are you, when you look at that data, what is success? Because this is one of those tricky subjects where when you see spikes, it could be a good thing, right? Like, it's a good thing that people are coming forward and reporting. But what does, as a company, success look like to you when you look at that data? And why are you gathering that data? So tell us a bit more.
Hello, first of all, thank you very much for inviting Ajara Group on this very important discussion. As you mentioned, we have more than 1,500 employees across whole Georgia. We operate in hospitality, so we own hotels and restaurants and multifunctional spaces across Georgia, and ensuring gender equality and a safe workspace, especially for women, is a top priority for us. So what we did, one of the first tools that we implemented back in 2020 was to work on the sexual harassment prevention mechanism. And I remember this very clearly because it was actually one of the first projects that I was leading in my company. And when UN Women's Georgian branch approached us with this initiative, I would say that I think what really helped us move quickly was the openness and willingness from our leadership. And I think that having a strong female representation at the management and CEO level, as our CEO and deputy CEO are both women, made a real difference, because there was a clear willingness to engage with the topic, even though it was quite a new thing in Georgia at the time. And I would say that this process is still ongoing. It took some time to implement the policy and then to communicate them through our whole organization. And this year as well, we're conducting trainings together with UN Women throughout our whole organization. And in terms of data and tracking, what we do is we do track the reported incidents and cases that have been reported to us. And we also do employee satisfaction surveys several times a year. And these surveys include a dedicated section on sexual harassment and workplace safety. And I would say that this allows us to proactively track the incidents at our place, and to also track awareness and what are the perceptions, and what are the what's the trust in the reporting mechanisms. And we in such manner, we don't only rely on formal complaints, but we also act proactively. And I would say that one of the key successes we have had has been the increased awareness and understanding throughout our organization, and this is very important for us, because more than 50% of our employees are Gen Z, and many of them are entering the workforce for the first time, and they may not fully understand what constitutes as inappropriate behavior or harassment. And so education and clear communication have been very important. And at the same time, I would say that we have been facing our fair share of challenges. As a hospitality company, our employees are high risk, as it has been mentioned here, because our teams are not only interacting with each other, with their colleagues, but also with the guests, and this increases the exposure to the inappropriate behavior. And we also operate in different regions in Georgia. We have hotels in different regions of Georgia, including mountainous regions and areas where these topics are still kind of considered to be taboo, and communicating these issues to the people there clearly, but so that they are not intimidating, and to build trust with them has been a challenge. But I would say that especially this year's trainings have been very helpful in the terms, because we have been building trust, and now I would say that it's breaking some barriers over there, and people also start to acknowledge this topic over there as well.
What was interesting about what you said was how important it is for the leadership, for the CEO of a company to signal that this is important.
Yes.
Right? So that was pretty clear in what you were saying. And then something you said about Gen Z that made me think that that might be interesting also for Jemima to I'm sure you have a view on this, Jemima, because do you see more Gen Z downloading those apps? The app that there's something about the whole digital space which with the Gen Z connection that you mentioned, Anastasia, but maybe we'll come back to it. Well, thank you, Anastasia, for sharing that. I want to move to Lillian. So Lillian Onsongo is operations officer with IFC. You're based in Africa. And Lillian is working on an IFC program called Respectful Workplaces. And so Lillian, Rafael mentioned it also in the work that you did about the implications of workplace sexual harassment on productivity, on companies' bottom line, essentially. What is this research that you've done? You've recently done some research, right, that connects gender-based violence in the workplace to companies' bottom line, their productivity, really. So tell us a bit more about that research, and tell us also what methodology did you use, because it's a really hard something to quantify. I can feel a little bit of a sound disturbance. I don't know if it's from my side. I'll mute here. Yeah, just requesting everyone to mute, please, because there was some disturbance. But over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Namita, and it's been very interesting hearing all of the perspectives, because they all contribute to what we're going to talk about. So IFC has been doing this kind of studies across the globe, but I'm going to talk about the latest one that we did in Kenya last year, trying to quantify the cost of gender-based violence for the private sector in Kenya. So this was the first of its kind in Kenya. We've had previous studies that were looking at the social impacts of gender-based violence for survivors and for the health sector. But this was the first one that was looking at the private sector and trying to put a number to what we know is a very insidious behavior. So in terms of methodology, I'm happy to say, what we had from the UN Women Studies, it's basically what we were looking at. A wider definition of gender-based violence. And for us, it's aligned to the ILO Convention 190 definition, where we're not just looking at gender-based violence, but we're also looking at harassment that is non-gender-based and that is not sexual. So we go beyond the sexual harassment and look at other behaviors like bullying, like discrimination, and all of these other things that have a human impact to the quality of life that people experience at work, but also in the world of work, including transportation, including accommodation, including even the domestic angle, because we know what happens at home also comes to affect productivity at work. So that was the sort of definition that we were working with. So we used a mixed method approach. So we had an employee survey and we worked with companies. We invited about 40 over 40 companies. But again, because this is a difficult subject, we found only about 26, responded, and we had over 3,500 people responding to our online survey. And towards the end, because it was really hard, some companies were pulling out, and there's all of these difficulties. We also employed some paper surveys to sort of boost the response, because online surveys are traditionally really hard to, find the numbers that we want. So we had the online survey, but we also had a qualitative side where we talked to people in focus group discussions. So we had employees for over 19 of the companies that we had, just having conversations about their daily experiences at work to sort of put a human face to, some of these definitions that we have and all of that. We also talked to managers in key interviews, managers and leaders and HR practitioners to try and find out from the policy side what's happening with the organizations, what frameworks are there, what reporting mechanisms are there. So we try and put all of this together. But then on the costing side, we use the methodology that you might be familiar with. It's called the Vanna. Gosh, I have to remember that. It's very familiar. We've used it all over the world. I'll give you the name as we go on. But as we use this methodology, is basically using the data that you get from the employee survey, and then you use it to calculate the cost using average wage values in the country or the company that you're working with, depending on the context that you're working, whether you're generating company level data or for us across the private sector. So basically that's what we did. So we put all of this and triangulated and tried to look at different characteristics across gender, sectors, and employee levels and all of that. And the end of it is we were able to see, prevalence around the private sector. We were able to see patterns, we were able to see risk groups and all of that. So that's it for methodology, and we'll share links to the study so you can dig in and see some of the details around it. Thanks, Namita.
Oh, thank you, Lillian. This is such important work because it helps open the eyes of management, right? And Anna mentioned this in the beginning as well, that it's not just data for the sake of having a number, but that it just makes visible something that sometimes remains invisible to a lot of us as we go around our normal work. And then it inspires action. And if there is the argument very clearly quantified about how it's impacting a company's productivity, then we hope that that's going to immediately raise the urgency of the situation. But thank you, Lillian. And we can dig a bit more deeper on some of the findings of your report. But just going over to you, Dan, it's so nice to have Vodafone represented, the Vodafone company represented. Of course, your foundation is doing fabulous work, but also from a company point of view, right? I mean, you're not far behind. And so tell us a little bit as a company, what's the data that you're looking at? And tell us how the data is linking to what you're actually doing in terms of action.
Of course, no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Jemima alluded to, Vodafone has been in the space as a entirety for nearly 20 years now. Through the work the Vodafone Foundation has been doing, we've also come to understand that gender-based violence and domestic violence abuse is a world of work issue, and we want to use data to kind of inform what we would do. How would Vodafone respond to this to support survivors of gender-based violence and domestic violence and abuse? So in 2019 we commissioned some research, an international study with KPMG and Vodafone Foundation as well, doing an opinion research across 9 of our countries that we operated in as well. The data we got back from that helped inform our global policy. So we all know the 1 in 3 stat, which has been across today, it's quite a lot today, but we also found out, around out of survivors, 4 million employees from the international study who lost out on promotions at work because of gender-based violence and domestic violence and abuse, which is potentially 10 billion in Great British pounds is what we measured it in potential earnings of loss each year. Also, it's 1.6 billion pounds lost in economic output each year, purely just from absences at work related to domestic violence as well. And we've already spoken about that kind of reduction in productivity as well. So we know this is a world of work issue. There will be survivors in all of our workforces, and we wanted to address that. So we work closely with domestic violence and abuse sector to produce a global toolkit, which we sent out to all of our employees and is available to all employees and managers. And we also introduced, and we were one of the first multinational companies to do this, was a global policy on domestic violence and abuse. What this policy did is it outlined the support that was available for survivors of domestic violence and abuse in the workplace, recognizing it was a world of work issue. But through our research, we also found that on average, survivors would take around 10.1 days of annual leave or their own personal leave to address situations that are related to domestic violence and abuse. We wanted to not have to use their own annual leave, their holiday time for that. So as part of our policy, we introduced 10 days safe paid leave, which all survivors can take each year as well as part of this policy. We wanted to ensure that survivors had like a safety plan as well. So if they disclosed to us that they were a survivor, that we could support them. So we trained up the relevant people around the company, so such as HR, but also security, IT, property, people who could put safety measures in place to protect a survivor at work, whether it's through changing emails, changing phone numbers, informing the desk at reception that, to not let this person who's a potential perpetrator into the building. Change of location or flexible working, all this kinds of stuff we introduced in the policy and trained the people relevant to do. And one of the big things that we introduced in our code of conduct as well is that if any employee who perpetrates violence using any Vodafone assets, tools, software, whatever it may be, it's a breach of our code of conduct and will be liable to disciplinary action as well. So we're holding perpetrators to account in that instance too. So that policy was launched in early 2020. The world completely drastically changed as we went into a global pandemic, and coming out of that pandemic, we wanted again to see what the impact of domestic violence abuse had during that. And so we commissioned some research again across those 9 same countries to kind of measure the difference. And we saw there was a 56% increase in domestic violence during the pandemic as well. What we wanted to do, we knew that we had to do more as well. So we had our policy in place, we trained up certain people, we had our toolkit. We then wanted to expand this to be able to have a full network of support outside of the core people to support survivors. So in 2023, we launched our Global Allies Against Abuse program. We partnered with an organization in the UK, and we developed our own training in collaboration with the foundation as well, and this organization, which is an in-person and virtual training where employees can be trained up to recognize the signs of domestic violence and abuse, be able to respond appropriately to it, and refer survivors to the appropriate support that they need as well. So using that 3 R's, the recognize, respond, and refer, we have now trained up over 250 allies across 17 of our countries that we operate in to be able to recognise, respond and refer for domestic violence and abuse and support survivors. In terms of measuring impact, those 10 days safe paid leave we don't record in our HR system. That is, if a survivor needs to take those 10 days paid safe leave. It's a conversation they either disclose with someone they feel safe to, a HR business partner or their manager, and that leave is given to them. It's not recorded in our HR system, and that's for privacy and to protect them as well. So it's not recorded in the back end, so no one can actually see it of the system. And through our allies as well, everything is kept strictly confidential. There's conversations between survivors and our network of allies. And sometimes we speak to our allies if they are willing to talk about how many people they've supported, but sometimes they don't as well, and we keep that down to them as well, to keep that confidentiality and also that trust that the survivor has with the company and has with that ally, because that is key to this the sort of success of this network that we have.
Thank you, Dan. And I think it was interesting what you said, because what you really outlined was that we can't look at domestic violence in isolation with workplace sexual harassment. It's actually a continuum, and I think Lillian was trying to make the same point, that you're the same human being. If you're subject to violence at home, you're likely to carry it over to work, and then that results in, and it's amazing that you were actually able to quantify the number of days a person had to take leave because you were just struggling with the situation at home. And so thank you for making the point that it's not, we can't address this as silos. It is a continuum. But maybe back to you then, Lillian. Did you want to come in again on this impact on particularly absenteeism and turnover, which you tried to quantify? And also, if you could share a bit how IFC takes those findings into action through the Respectful Workplace program. Like, what do you do with the Respectful Workplace? Do you find uptake in companies? Like, how do you make that entry point when you start talking to a company on the Respectful Workplace program?
Yeah, no, thanks, Namita. And just as you had, it was 10 days for Vodafone. For the Kenya study, it was 24 days that companies were losing per individual per year. So if you compute that, it's about a whole month that companies are losing employees who are not able to work due to presenteeism. They're at work, but they're not concentrating, or they're not coming to work, absenteeism, or they come to work late. And there's all of this cost then to the company, to productivity. In terms of how, and I think we mentioned at the beginning, when you extrapolate that to the national level, we had about 95 billion Kenya shillings, which is about 700 American USD costs to companies because of GBV. And if you look at the Kenya GDP, for example, that's about 1% of the Kenyan GDP.
Oh, we lost Lillian. Oh no. Maybe Ali, if we can see if we can get her back. But I know that we're also running out of time. We have just 7 minutes. So maybe as she finds her way back, maybe we can just move to you, Anastasia. And then I want to keep like 5 minutes for some questions that have come up in the Q&A. But Anastasia, do you sort of big headline, you started to talk about it in the earlier round, but what is the impact that you're seeing of the sort of really focused work that the company has done to address this?
So I would say one of the most important impact-wise that we're seeing is increased visibility. So topics like gender-based violence are no longer unspoken at our company, and it's become part of regular conversations here. And also in your previous question, you touched down about if the reported incidents are increasing or not, and that's also one thing that we consider as a success, because at a first glance it might seem concerning for some companies if the reported incidents increase year to year, but we actually see it as a positive sign, because in a large workforce in hospitality or anywhere else, cases like this, sexual harassment usually exist regardless. They're just not being reported. So for us, increase in reporting reflects that the trust between our employees and the management is growing, and that they feel safer to speak up, and that also what's very important, they believe that the organization will respond appropriately, and we make sure that the response is always appropriate. And we have a big commission of management team from different departments that do the internal investigation, and then we also the person who is appealing can also involve the ombudsman's office if they want to, and if this case then becomes a criminal case, then we involve the authorities as well. So overall, I would say that tracking the incidents, proactively approaching the employees have helped us to move from a tabooed topic to accountability and to raising awareness, which I think that is a very critical step towards prevention of the cases overall.
Thank you, Anastasia. I see Lillian's back. Thank you, Lillian. I'm sorry that your internet is not behaving. But just in the 4 minutes that we have, maybe just a few rapid fire sort of questions that have come, and maybe if we can keep our answers short. So one, of course, Lillian, maybe you want to come back, and there's a question that particularly is asking you if you can share what the key challenges were when you were collecting data, like what are the challenges that you faced? And then Dan, there's another question for you about how what you've done at the company level, does it trickle down to your subsidiaries in countries? Like, are you finding that uptake that's sort of for the policies that the corporate is leading? So, and maybe there'll be more questions that'll come up. But with that, did you want to come in, Lillian, now that your internet is cooperating?
Yes. Sorry about that. So very quickly on the challenges, and there were many, because as we said, this is a sensitive topic. So the first challenge was even getting to convince companies to participate, because this is sensitive data and some did not want to identify. And so one of the things is we didn't have company level identifiers. So we had to just produce like aggregated results. So that was one of the challenges. The other one was, as we mentioned before, it was an online survey, but we know globally online surveys has very low response rates, and it's around, again, as I saw someone mention in the comments, it's around confidentiality. People are not sure. So that was one of the challenges that we had, and at some point we had to introduce like paper questionnaires, so that people could feel and feel more assured about what they're doing. So those were the main challenges. It was around confidentiality and assuring people. And in some companies, if as I think Dan mentioned, or was it Anastasia in the beginning, if you have leadership that is already convinced about the importance of this topic, then it's easier to engage. So for the companies that we had leadership that was already sold on to this, it was easier, but for others, it was a bit more difficult to engage.
Hopefully with this data, there will be more uptake, right? Because we are making the case that this is important from a very business point of view. So thank you, Lillian. Did you want to come in, Dan, on that question about uptake from other countries and through your subsidiaries?
Yeah, of course. So any country or any part of the Vodafone company where we are a majority shareholder, our policy covers that country. If we are a minority shareholder as part of the joint venture, we, due to kind of the regulation and governance structure that we have, we recommend the policy, and we see that in some of our joint ventures where we do have a smaller shareholder impact, but so we just kind of recommend in those kind of subsidiaries where we aren't the kind of majority governing party, but we do recommend them and see that in some of them that we do.
And a quick question for you, Jemima. Somebody wants to know exactly what kinds of topics do you find from your data that people are interested in, or what kinds of guides, if you wanted to add a little bit quickly?
Yes, absolutely. So the kind of we have about 30 guides in total, and obviously they're translated into the country languages. So the most popular, the most read guide consistently is called Forms of Abuse. So that basically is a detailed explanation on what domestic abuse is, and it's kind of like that iceberg explanation, everything that sort of comes underneath it. And another very popular guide is about online safety. So that's as I said, it's we've seen an increase in that in the last year or so, and I think that's because of new dangers of being online, and yeah, and then the sort of next and most used feature is the questionnaires. So you can take a self-assessment, and Bright Sky will assess your situation, basically assess your sort of risk level, and then it will give you automated advice on the back of that. So yeah, and I'm happy I can put the Bright Sky website link in so you can see how it works in the chat.
Thank you. This has been wonderful, and I felt like we were just getting started, right? I think we just scratched the surface of all of the fabulous work that you're all doing. So thank you so much, Jemima, Dan, Anastasia, Lillian. This was really wonderful. And thank you to Anna and Rafaela and colleagues in UN Women, and also my colleagues who've been working to get this up and running. And just for you all, just wanted to share quickly on our side, from the World Bank Group side, we are really, as we speak, hanging on to every word that you were saying, because as we speak, we are putting together some thinking and a plan to up our ambition on what we've been doing on gender-based violence, pulling together all that we know from evidence and all that our partners know from evidence, both in the public spaces, but also on the private sector side. And really asking ourselves, what does it take to really scale up our ambition? So if any of you among the participants, or even among the panelists, do share your resources, if there's a new report, if there's a new piece of evidence, if there's new data, if there's a new solution that you think needs scaling, please reach out and let us know. We are all ears at this point, as we all should be, actually. But thank you very much. This was fantastic, and we will all remain in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all. Wishing all a great day and a great continuation of the week. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.